Well, um, I guess I'd just like to start with your name and the organization you represent.
Okay, my name is Dot Erickson Anderson, and I am connected to the Ohio Family Care Association. And the Ohio Family Care Association is an advocacy group that works with um, primary parents, kinship parents, foster parents, and adoptive parents, trying to be sure that they are represented in our laws and in our practices that relate in an equity kind of way.
And you kind of spoke about this before with me. You have firsthand experience with being a kinship caregiver. In what ways do you interact with or kinship caregivers through your organization?
Well, through the organization, we have several methods. We, of course, relate to other groups like the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition and work together with them. But we also have what we call a warm line, which is an access to our input from caregivers. So people will call us on the phone through the warm line. They will connect through us through our website. We have a place where they can ask questions. They connect through that. And some will connect through our Facebook pages or connect to us through online groups. Oftentimes, those online groups are groups that deal both with foster parents and kinship parents and probably adoptive parents. So, in that sense, we respond on those platforms. Um, the kinds of questions that we get from people, uh, because we're an advocacy group and we don't necessarily do direct service per se, we are more looking at concept and issues and equity along the way. The most of the requests that we come with are people who are confused about how to get services, how to what they're hearing on the news, what does that mean? How do they connect somebody they know with some resources, or how do they, as a kinship parent, find those resources? Sometimes they just connect with us to discuss their emotions and issues. So, like the warm line can be a helpline in terms of that. What kinds of issues are you emotionally dealing with? And we will talk with them through those kinds of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like kind of like a support system as
Yeah,
well.
a very loose support system. There's
Yeah,
no structure to that.
yeah, in whichever ways are needed. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Um, and so yeah, my next question I guess can kind of connect to that. You say you have like this warm line where you can offer like resources, give them like specific resources to what their problems are. But what challenges are you hearing from kinship caregivers?
Well, I think we hear all the traditional ones. I think that the aid for people who are dealing in low level economic situations, and that's
Hmm.
oftentimes the problem that families are facing when another one, two, or three kids get dumped into their. That's the wrong word. Get placed with them. I said the word dumped because sometimes that's the way it feels from a parent's point of view, that you're not really planning on having extra children in your life, but all of a sudden there they are.
Hmm.
And those children can be anywhere from newborns to 15, 16 teenagers, a year old teenagers. And the resources you plan for your own parentage are not necessarily available. And
Hmm.
so we oftentimes get people who are looking for those kinds of resources. The state now has the Ohio Can Project, which is supposed to be providing those kinds of resources, information about those kinds of resources. So, if appropriate, we would refer them on to them. But um, more often, we get people who are concerned because of something they've heard in publicity, uh, and they want to know how they can access the new money that the governor is supposedly giving to primary family or to kinship families. So they are looking for a pathway to get through to some of the resources that they're hearing about, but they haven't connected with. Um, Sometimes they are looking for information about how they proceed about adoption of the kids that are in their care. The whole issue of permanency is quite confusing in our state, and kinship providers get concerned about what permanency means in their families when the state gets involved in their family life. And so sometimes those are the kinds of questions that we'll be responding to. I'm surprised sometimes because my experience was with teenagers, how many of those calls come in with people who have teenagers who are not being able to connect with the agency that has placed the kids with them, or have a question about whether they should even connect with the agency based upon the kinds of problems that the teenager is presenting for them. Some
Mm,
of them are concerns, for example, is the teenager wants to have connection with their birth family or their primary family, and the kinship provider is unclear as to what's expected of them in relationship to their relative or the kinship person, the primary parent person. If that makes any sense, it's like all kinship providers are not grandparents, and
yeah.
oftentimes they are people who may know the child but are not directly related to them in terms
Mhm.
of the bloodline. And so they are a little bit confused sometimes about what their role really is in relationship to the family. And once a child is moves into kinship care through the auspices of child welfare, it's difficult for them try to sometimes figure out where they play in that line. What is their responsibility? The one thing I didn't say before, Devon, is that we operate with kinship care providers who are related to the child welfare system, versus the overall bigger picture of kinship care providers who are out there who are not necessarily brought into the system through child welfare. So the
Mm,
questions we hear are more those related to the child welfare system.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, and so you kind of talked about this as well, that one of the big concerns is the aid, how to help them functionally get more aid. My question is, could you just describe how more financial support from the state would help these caregivers?
Well, I think that there are several issues related to this, and it's not just more financial aid; it's clearness about what is available that is really needed right now. Certainly, the amount of money that the state has allocated for caregivers is very limited, and yet it sounds like the publicity makes it sound like we've got this big pot of money that caregivers can pull into, but in reality, the regulation is so limited that it almost doesn't provide anything for caregivers except to get them started on a process. So right now, the state is pushing caregivers to move into licensure as foster parents on the hope that that more resources could come to that line of paying for that. Unfortunately, what is not being communicated to the kinship provider is that in order to become a foster parent and have continuing support in this way, it means that your child stays in custody of the children's services. And that's not really being communicated clearly. And so kinship providers right now are feeling the stress of signing up to be a kinship foster parent, um, with really what would be a very little income increase for a very short period of time, and not realizing that that would mean that their child and their the relative who has the open case in children's services would stay as an open case, and that children's services would stay involved in their life. So those kinds of things are just not clear in what the state is currently doing. So having another resource where income comes into a family that's really based upon some of their financial needs, that is more based upon what it means to take on additional children into a limited income household, is really very important. And the small little piece that we've put into place does very little to solve that problem. So we continue to have a problem of not having enough basic support for families who are at that poverty level. So that means us really looking at, our food resources, our housing resources, um, our resources for mental health, our resources for all different kinds of of things that if you have enough money you can access in our community. But if you're at the low end of income, you can't. And it's those low end folks who come into connection with child welfare. And we're not doing anything within the child welfare system. Maybe that's a little straight. We're not doing enough within the child welfare system to assist those families to move to recognize what is happening at their poverty level. So it's not looking seriously enough about what we are doing that is causing a real barrier here. Um, Oftentimes, child welfare functions on a kind of a white middle class two-parent function of expectation, and that's just not the families that are living in child welfare. Those families who are coming into touch with child welfare are more likely to be at the poverty level without the basic resources that are needed. And yet, instead of increasing our basic resources like our SNAP and our housing allowance and those other kinds of resources, we're drawing back, we continue to draw back on them. So those families are continuing to need additional resources. Um, we don't really have the necessary resources in mental health for those families, or necessarily the path for families to get there. So those kinds of struggles continue to be. So all those kinds of things, it's not just adding more money to the basic allowance. Certainly that would be a great deal of improvement if we could add what foster parents get without having to also add the regulations of the federal government, because that's where our state begins to continue to function. And that is, we set our policies in practice around where the money can come in from outside the state. And so we fluctuate from whatever the federal guidelines are going to be at the moment to the services we deliver. And right now we're not doing very good at delivering services at the kinship level, particularly when those families are connected to our child welfare system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that does. Um, like you said, it's just about equity. It's trying to balance it. Um, it's even more than just the financial aid of it, or the financial support. Like you said, it's being able to have knowledge about it, being able to help them functionally with, like, food, resources, that kind of thing. Just being able to prepare to have another child in the home. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. Um,
I think the other thing that I might add to that is that we haven't really recognized the fact that our families are no longer two parent, one parent staying at home, functioning, servicing to take care of our children.
mhm.
And we haven't recognized the fact that in most families that come into contact with child welfare, a lot of them don't have consistent I mean, there's more than one paternal or maternal parentage line in that family. So you may have a sibling group of three kids, but they may have one maternal line, but three different paternal lines that would be involved in taking and helping with that family situation. And we're not yet at a point of really recognizing what we need to do in order to give access to help to each of those lines. We are still kind of stuck in looking as if all the siblings that come in are coming in from the same parentage. They are siblings and they need to have the contact with each other, but we are still looking at them as if they have the same parentage, and that's how we can set our rules and our regulations and the resources that we give to families. So we're a long ways from really reaching an equity situation with the families that we're bringing into child welfare at this point in time. Is that too confusing?
No, I get that. Um, I just want to ask too, do you have any other comments you'd like to share with the legislators here in our state?
Um, I guess that I would like to have them think a little bit more seriously about what child welfare really is designed to be and
Mm-hmm.
what it really currently is. Um, child welfare really is designed to be an assistance to primary families to restructure their lives in a way that they can be healed in the community of support. But child welfare is really a child under the premise of child protective services. It's really a child separation system. And we give more resources to the separation of families than we do to the connectivity of families, to keeping
Mm-hmm.
families together. And kinship plays a big role in this because we're struggling now with how kinship really fits into our system. Are they part of the separation of families or are they part of the healing of families? And there are many things within the system that are making this almost impossible to understand unless you're completely involved in it, because we have such a variety of counties, of private agencies, of folks that are providing services, and such a variety of ways in which services can be provided that it's difficult to understand where to put the resources. But but we need to dig deeply, I think, in that how we build those resources into a very diverse population of folks, and how we keep it honest to their culture, how we keep it honest to their the parentage that's involved. And it's not something we can just throw money at. It is something that we need more money thrown at, that's for sure. But it's not something that's the only answer to. So I'm hoping that the legislature understands that it's a deep subject and
Yeah.
taking on understanding it is very important as they allocate the funds for how to bring solutions to families who are in that kind of need.
Yeah. And I think that you did a good job just saying that, there needs to be more education, awareness, and more investment into kinship care as a whole, financially, and just structurally. Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I just want to thank you so much for
You're very
taking
welcome.
this time out and like scheduling this with us, and um, really appreciate your input and uh, your personal perspective of doing this work. And yeah, I just want to thank you for doing this kind of work. It's really encouraging to see that example. It really is.
Well, good luck. You'll get there one day soon.
I'm trying to.
Well, good luck with that, Joanne.
Thank you.